Hi, everybody. My name's Cindy Fesemeyer. I am with the State Library in Wisconsin, and on behalf of the four of us, thanks for having us. Our session is Stronger Together, Building Community During Pandemic. We're gonna be talking about um, teaching, learning, and practicing community engagement techniques in a virtual world created by our pandemic. Next slide, please, Amber. And here we are, Erica Freudenberger, Amber Williams, Susan Hildreth, and me, Cindy Fesemeyer. You're going to be hearing from each of us today, so we can all introduce ourselves a little bit along the way. Next slide, please. So, like a good librarian, I'd like to start our session with a story time. This story takes place in Kenosha, Wisconsin. That is along Lake Michigan and just slightly south of Milwaukee, if anyone knows Wisconsin geography. And it just so happens that there are a couple of amazing community organizers in Kenosha who have harnessed the power of community engagement during the pandemic, during Black Lives Matter, during this strange year that we've all lived together. And they turn those tools of engagement into really positive outcomes for Kenosha. So quickly, the backstory on Kenosha, like many communities across the country, we saw police brutality against a man named Jacob Blake, who was shot in the back while he was leaning into his car that housed his children. And people were unhappy about that. Riots ensued. The neighborhood in which it happened was leveled as if bombs had been blown up there. Buildings were rubble. It looked like a war zone. And sorry, it was a tough time for everybody. So enter some people being trained right now in community engagement techniques, the amazing Xander Harris, Brandon Morris, and their coach, Leah Langby. Together, they were learning how to work with their communities, and little did they know that they were going to have to put some of those tools into practice immediately as riots broke out around the shooting of Jacob Blake. They already had relationships existing with predominantly Black communities in sort of the center of Kenosha, and they leveraged those relationships and they asked people what they needed for support in these trying times. They listened closely, they processed that information, and what they did is connect the community that was affected with the powers that be within the municipality of Kenosha. And for the first time, they were able to bring the city councilman who was elected years and years previous to the riots taking place. They were able to bring him into this part of the city with these constituents who he represented year after year, but never once had walked into that neighborhood. So for the first time, he walked into the neighborhood arm in arm with these library organizers and got to meet the people he represented. And I'll say that was an amazing initial win for Xander and Brandon doing the work in Kenosha. And that's just an example to let you know what an engaged community can do together. Next slide, please. So like I said at the beginning, I'm Cindy, like Cindy Church and Dorcas on this call today. I'm with the State Library in Wisconsin, working with continuing education. And for us, it's called the Department of Public Instruction. Next slide, please. So I want to tell you what we did in order to get to that good story that happened in Kenosha. Good, tragic, but interesting outcomes there. So a couple of years ago, 3 years ago maybe, into the LSTA plan, which is a requirement for all state libraries, one of the tenets of the plan here in Wisconsin is a focus on community engagement. Along with that, there is a focus on leadership. And so it was determined that in order to fully administer those points of our strategic plan for LSTA spending, that they needed to create a position that was the adult and community services consultant, hire for that position. They hired me. I came in and then I read the LSTA plan and a second report that went along with it, a community engagement report done by the Russell Group that gauged the need and mechanisms for community engagement training here in Wisconsin. So I began, I read these things, I did my background preparation, and ultimately I saw that our planning called for the state library to take a primary role as a clearinghouse and a portal for community engagement topics and plannings and trainings. It called for us to capture and communicate engagement stories like I just did at the top of our webinar. It called for us to convene conferences and trainings, and you're going to hear a whole lot about that in a moment. And it called for us to set core competencies and practices that are informed by the successes and challenges of this program you're going to hear about in a minute. So with that in mind, the thing that I did, one of the first things I did was to issue an RFP to hire trainers to help us do exactly those things. And that leads to our next slide, please. Take it away, Susan.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. So I'm Susan Hildreth, and just as a brief little intro, I've done lots of things in my career, including serving as the director of the Institute of Museum and Library Services, so I know a lot about LSTA. I also got a lot of LSTA as the California State Librarian for a while, and I've managed other large public libraries, including San Francisco and Seattle. So when Cindy was talking about issuing that RFP, that was a great step. And Thriving Libraries, the consulting group who's presenting with you today along with Cindy, was selected as the training partner for this exciting initiative. And with guidance from Cindy, she's our guru and our client, we developed Wisconsin Libraries Transforming Communities. It's the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction partnership with the American Library Association for a new state-level community engagement training. It's the first of its kind in the country, and little did we know we would have to shift to a complete virtual mode. Next slide, please, Amber. So here we'll talk a little bit about the goals of the program. Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction worked closely with Thriving Libraries to develop the plan for an 18-month initiative to provide training and support for this first cohort to develop the skills and competencies that Cindy mentioned in community engagement. Program goals include public libraries inspired to participate in communities to meet those community needs, particularly on a local level for their community or neighborhood. Also, a thorough understanding of community needs and future aspirations from diverse stakeholders, building a deeper relationship with communities that are typically underserved, and we can see a great example of that in the Kenosha story. Finally, we want to make sure our participants understand community-based planning strategies so that public library staff can develop and implement programs and service offerings that serve community needs. We've been doing this for a long time, but we're really trying to intentionally look outside to shape what we're doing in the library and in the community. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of a description of our framework here to really build strong community. How could those lofty goals be achieved? They're really achieved by adopting community-based planning strategies where all our activities, services, and programs are informed and driven by needs and aspirations identified by our communities. And it's really all about connecting our particular cohort with their community. Through authentic listening and reflection of the communities we serve, we really achieve this goal. The goal of the particular initiative we've worked on is to develop these critical skills in our participants. We focus on, we develop teams. We're focusing on teams that are comprised of a library representative, sometimes there may be two representatives, and a community representative who create a partnership to engage deeply with their communities and make sure they develop a project that addresses an aspirational need or desire identified through this team's deep community engagement. And we can see that happening. You're going to hear more stories throughout the presentation. The teams are also paired with coaches who cheerlead and shepherd the teams through their community engagement learning journey. And also the coaches are trained in authentic leadership, resilience, and self-care. Next slide, please. So this is kind of what this looks like. It's our little schematic here. The teams are very important. You can see they're the top of the spectrum here. Interested teams and coaches completed an application to participate in this program. It was critical that community partners were identified and on board as part of the application process. There was a rigorous review process by an advisory board convened by Cindy of talented Wisconsin library professionals representing different types and sizes of libraries. So 12 teams and 7 coaches were selected to participate in this first cohort. Most of our coaches are assigned to 2 teams to serve in that coach role. Community partners range from a local Rotary Club, a health department, and the Hispanic Collaborative Network. So also critical partners in this cohort are the Thriving Libraries team, that's us, we're the trainers, and the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, Cindy Fesemeyer. Now, 2 of our folks who you'll hear from, Amber Williams and Erica Freudenberger, have deep experience in library community engagement work, and they share their knowledge with a variety of tools with all our participants. I also work with Beck Tench, another one of our team members who's not here today. She's an amazing person, a University of Washington Information School PhD student, and we try to strengthen our coaches' resilience and leadership in supporting their team. So this really is a cohort or team effort. And over an 18-month period, and we're now just about 12 months or so into that, we provide regularly scheduled trainings, webinars, and Zoom sessions focused on developing these skills and strategies to identify community needs, particularly using demographic information to make sure we're reaching all the segments of our communities. We also work on creating the story of your community, also planning and carrying out programs that address community aspirations and measuring the success of those activities, which can have both a short-term impact and long-term results in your community. So that's a brief outline of our program, and I'm going to turn it over to Amber, who will do a deeper dive into this initiative.
Thanks, Susan. All right, there I am, and here I am changing slides. I'm a multitasker. So strategy of this program on the team side of things. I'm Amber Williams. I have a day job in Eastern Washington as a public librarian, and I consult with Thriving Libraries. My background in community engagement by that name started with my participation in American Library Association's Libraries Transforming Communities in 2014. It was very much a gateway to a lot of community engagement tools. And Erica and I kind of bring together our favorites and fill in the gaps where we feel things are missing. And this past 12 months has been a year of definitely things missing. But the original strategy and basically backbone of it all remains the same, in that we want our communities to, it's this commitment to change through community engagement, through real, get out of your building and into your community, get out from behind that desk and meet people who aren't already your customers, and work together to build the future. And that middle step, you're asking questions about what kind of community do you want to live in? Or, some questions around the pandemic of what are some of the things we're trying to accomplish in just the next few months? And you're responding in real time. The program might be 18 months long, but that doesn't mean we wait until month 17 to react to what we hear. It means that we're making changes as we go and we're responding. And I say we in the royal sense because yes, we're doing it as trainers, but this is what our teams are doing. They're listening and they're acting and they're building towards, it's like throwing pebbles in the water, right? And a smaller pebble still makes ripples, but those ripples attract attention and you have more partners and you can lift bigger stones to make bigger ripples. And they are working towards building that future that their community wants together. Here's the theory. Back when we were originally making the big roadmap for how this was all going to go. You can see this laid out here. In February of 2020, we had our first team call, and the coaches had their first team call, and we were using this kind of rather neat service that not everyone had heard of called Zoom. And people were, on camera together in rooms, and we introduced it as this sort of, novel way. Instead of, a conference call, we're going to, use our cameras, and we're going to have these virtual calls on months that we're not meeting in person. The intent was to have 4 in-person cohort trainings. And that was important to us because one of the goals for Wisconsin is building this, community of practitioners. And this is how we build relationships, by time together and working together and doing this together. And well, we know what happened, because hindsight's 2020, a pandemic hit. And that first in-person training with the coaches, meant to be this deep dive into leadership and mindfulness that Beck and Susan were putting on, was it postponed? It was canceled. Cindy was having to deal with, well, do I just delay stuff? Because, and this is only going to be 3 weeks that we're closing, right? It's only going to be 6 weeks that we're closing. Well, it's only going to be 3 months. It's only going to be 6 months. It's going to be a year. It's going to be, it kept growing. And Cindy made the decision to continue on with the program. And we decided that we could shift it into virtual as we needed to, assuming that we were going to, be in person later. So there were definitely disruptions for us, but even more disruptions for what this meant for teams. Because remember, the strategy is to get out of your building and go talk to people. And suddenly we couldn't do that in the same kinds of ways. So for COVID-19, here I am, an optimistic extrovert who I kept believing that we were going to be in person and that we were going to be able to still do these things like we had planned. And it was our fellow trainer, Beck Tench, who pointed out to me that I was picturing the future as I saw the past. And that even if we could do things in person, it didn't look the same. We were going to be wearing masks. We were going to have distance. And so if I was having troubles picturing anything but the past, our teams were in the same spot. And they have done such a great job of taking, some suggestions that we had. Well, try this. We haven't had to do this in a pandemic. So maybe try this, try that. And some of their success stories about reaching out and community engagement in the pandemic. Oh, let me touch on this. We were really good about being clear about the plan, so that as they're planning, they understood that they had time to do these things, and that is something that didn't change. This was an 18-month program for a reason. This work takes time, and they were having to change how they were doing things. And so we were making adjustments constantly to what we were hearing from them and what they needed. And you'll see that under training topics as of October 1st, because we changed them and we continued to change them through all of this. Topics changed as we heard back from them about what they needed and when they needed it. And it was sort of that lead by example, because we could make these changes and they could implement changes too. That just because we started with an idea isn't mean that's where we ended up. Some of the things that they did in response. So here's community engagement. We're trying to have conversations with people in our community, and kind of the natural thing seems set up a Zoom call. But how do you get people on a Zoom call? The Kenosha team had the great idea to use their social media platforms, their personal ones at that, and start with just, I'm going to invite 5 people that I know. And like a chain letter, I'm going to ask them to invite 5 other people, and then those people to invite 5 people. And at the end of it, as it's grown exponential and who's been invited, 150 people have received this invitation from somebody they know. And maybe 10% are going to show up, but that's 15 people who want to be there in this conversation. And they had great success early on with that model in getting people in to talk to them. And that's how they started those relationships in May and in June, so that when August came and they started the riot started, and they were able to quickly act because of the foundation that they made early on. Another one of our teams in Eau Claire, also using Zoom calls, they partnered with a local artist who came up with, basically like a craft project, an art project that the library was able to have supplies for, and they got picked up and delivered to people who were participating in these conversations. And so the library is following their script for the questions they're asking about, community and where kind of community you want to live in. And interspersed is their craft master giving them directions on their project as they're going. And people who were involved in those calls described them as so engaging, so cozy, and felt more like they were in person, really having those conversations and really making relationships with the people that they were with. The last example I wanted to share is Monona. So they were doing curbside pickup, which has been something pretty common in libraries now, and at least in many libraries, something that we'll continue to do because it's been so successful. They took the opportunity of people coming to the library in curbside capacity to maintain social distance and have one-on-one conversations or one-on carload conversations instead of engaging people just on Zoom or just over the phone. And were able, people wanted to talk, and they were able to talk to several people and had lots of good conversations from that. So we all can look back at 2020 and we know what happens next. COVID hits us in early spring. We're making these changes in response to that. And then in late May, we witnessed the killing of George Floyd. And though it wasn't the first death of an unarmed person of color in 2020, it galvanized much of the country in a way that hadn't happened before, and social justice rose to the forefront in headlines and conversations. Communities, organizations, and people made public commitments to change. And one of our WLTC teams, the Brewer Public Library, comes from Richland Center. It's a city in the southwest Wisconsin, and it's got a population of just over 5,000 people, the super majority of which are white. And in response to the May and June protests, the City of Richland Center started an Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Task Force. Because of the work that the library had already started doing in May and around, community aspirations, what kind of community you want to live in, all three members of the team were invited to participate on the EDI task force. And it felt like a big win to be invited. Now, as the trainers, as we heard more about what Richland Center was doing, and from our other teams who were hearing more from their communities, we could see that our original equity, diversity, and inclusive training was not going to cut it. And we are very fortunate in the summer of 2020, Ozi Alosium joined our team. She brings a different viewpoint, a skill set, and such thoughtfulness to our program. And the cohort has learned about positionality, trauma-informed programming, healing, organizational shift, and coming up, we've got evaluation with an equity lens. And if these topics are of interest to you, Ozi is the one who implemented the Denver Public Library Race Symposium from the summer of 2020, all of which was recorded, and they have kindly kept available, and access is free. I will include the link to that when it's not my turn to talk in chat. But on the Richland side of things, so the Richland Center story, and again, the Brewer Public Library. Let me get my mouse in the right spot. As we all learned from Ozi, and I include me in that, I have learned so much from Ozi. Richland Center's EDI task force was implementing their first action. It was to make Richland Center more welcoming to minorities, specifically the local Hispanic community. And while it was founded in good intentions, the Richland Center team could see that really they were making decisions about people without those people. And I know that this is the most hated word of our times, pivot. But we don't like it because it's overused, but it's overused because that's what everyone has had to do over and over in the past year. And our responses and commitments to social justice is no different. When the Richland Center team saw that they were making decisions about communities without any input from those people in those communities, they pivoted. They weren't so rigid in their decisions to not be able to make change when they saw it needed made. They've landed on, instead of this idea of let's make it more welcome, to instead telling the stories of the Hispanic community. So instead of telling the Hispanic community about why Richland is so welcoming, they're now asking the Hispanic community, what do you like about Richland Center? And the stories and the photographs are being recorded, collected, and published in a book. And in a time when we are all stretched so thin, the team recognized that they were asking the Hispanic community to share their time and energy, which are limited resources, made more scarce by a pandemic. The team decided to offer an honorarium to every participant to compensate them for their time and effort. And I know it isn't always feasible in our limited budgets to pay people for their time, but I implore you, that this is the big takeaway here, to build a stronger community, to think about what you're asking people to give you for free and who you're asking to do it. This really isn't as big a shift as it sounds. The Brewer Public Library is essentially paying storytellers and photographers for their contributions. It's no different than how we pay others to share their expertise for programs and events. So how do you get a marginalized community to participate in a pandemic? You recognize that their involvement has real monetary value and you compensate them for it, just like you would others for their time. Too often we think inclusion counts as payment, which is literally the least we can do. And many of our teams who are working around social justice issues in their projects have embraced this idea, and they are seeing the involvement is much different than if they weren't showing the same sort of respect for other people's time and effort. All right, Erica, I'm going to pass this on to you to talk about, the next thing that happens.
Great. Thank you, Amber. So I'm Erica Freudenberger. I work at the Southern Adirondack Library System as the Outreach, Engagement, and Marketing Consultant. And I also get to work with this tremendous group of women as part of Thriving Libraries, which is a blast. So January 2021, and let me be clear, 2021 was going to be, in my mind, this is this amazing year. But just when I thought it was safe to exhale, the January 6th insurrection happened. And after a year of pandemic and the righteous racial equity uprisings that were changing the conversation about racial equity in this country and our extended election drama, we found ourselves having to contend with the most direct attack on democracy to occur in my lifetime, for sure. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around the idea that a group of people who are unhappy with election results tried to discount the will of the people, which is one of the bedrocks of democracy, right? And as I was watching in horror, I was thinking about how we'd gotten to this inflection point and what that meant for public libraries, because we consider ourselves the cornerstones of democracy. And what does that mean when democracy is under attack? And while part of me wanted to retreat from the world and hunker down under my weighted blanket, the librarian in me wanted to organize, strategize, and mobilize, and to figure out a way to combat both the metric ton of misinformation that's been shared in the past year, while also bringing people together to acknowledge this collective trauma we've experienced and to talk about what's happening and how we see our way forward through this. It made me think even more clearly and be incredibly appreciative of the work our teams are doing, and kind of highlighted to me the importance of the work and these conversations we're having with our communities and the role it can play in restoring civility, and the importance of convening and facilitating difficult conversations about the values our communities hold in common, and the agency that each of us have as citizens to make change, because that's huge. And I think that gets lost on us. At this point, one thing the pandemic has done has put us in touch with a lot of different tech platforms. So we have lots of ways to connect with other people. And we also have a way, because we've gone virtual, there are ample opportunities to collaborate with experts from around the country to help us have difficult yet essential conversations. And at a time when I felt really overwhelmed and deeply concerned, I didn't retreat. And it wasn't because I didn't want to, but because I was inspired by the incredible work being done by our teams. They doubled down on the work they were doing and kept moving everything forward and recommitted to doing the really necessary and restorative work demanded by the ongoing series of crises. And what it did for me was bring into really sharp relief that the work we're talking about doing isn't theoretical. It's practical, and it speaks to the vital role we can play in our communities, even if it's one conversation and connection at a time. And the fact that, we're now a little bit more than a year into this program, and despite the many hurdles and obstacles, not one of our teams has dropped out. They've all continued through this process, which has been difficult on a number of levels, right? It's included a mind shift and a new way to address work, but also it's been objectively hard. But so I think that's the thing I want to share with you, is just how blown away I am by the talent and commitment of our teams and the incredible work they're doing. I'm going to now turn it over to Susan, who is going to talk about risk mitigation and how we dealt with the many things we went through.
Okay, thank you, Erica. Yeah, risk mitigation. That it sounds kind of wonky, but it's really important. And of course, Erica gave us a heartfelt sharing of how we respect our teams, yet we're going, and our coaches, but we're going into a world that can be scary and can have risks with these projects. So let's talk. We wanted to talk with you a little bit about that. So this risk mitigation is kind of a business-oriented term, really, for a worry party. That's what we call it colloquially. Soon after we began the program, we realized that embracing a virtual digital world was our reality, as we've said. We also knew we had to begin to anticipate some risks that might occur as a result of this new reality. And we were really informed by this work by our thoughtful colleague, Beck, and her great leadership in this area. We began a risk analysis of the WLTC program. After we did our initial pass at this review, we shared it with Cindy to get her take on the risks and possible strategies to address them. So what you're looking at now, you can see over here on the left side of the screen, we came up with all the risks. We just had a brainstorm about all the different kinds of things that happened. So we found this approach, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about a few other steps, to be effective for our project. And we have promoted this approach with all of our teams and coaches in considering their projects. Risk mitigation is a tried and true business strategy that can be applied to all parts of our lives. The process we used for creating our worry wall was fairly simple. And again, we identified the potential risks. Now let's go to the next slide, if that's okay. Okay, so here's just another version of what we did here, where we plotted all our worries. We organized the risks on a grid, as you can see here, looking at their potential impact and their likelihood or probability of occurring. When we had identified and prioritized these risks, you can see that right here, we wanted to figure out, okay, what do we do about this? So there are some basic strategies for how we dealt with these risks. And I know this is pretty small on the slide here, but I'm going to talk about them with you, and we can provide you more information if you want in the future. So in order, after we got these risks in these buckets, we wanted to figure out what to do with them. And we looked at something called the 5 T's: tolerate, treat, transfer, terminate, or take advantage. So just real briefly, to tolerate a risk, we just say, hey, that's a risk and we're going to accept it. We're going to live with it. Probably that would be something that wasn't that probable without a lot of impact. Then you could also decide to treat a risk, and that's to create a strategy to mitigate it. And we have really done that actively in the program, and our teams are doing that as well. We also could transfer a risk, and that would be shifting it to another person or another project and just saying, okay, well, we think this risk might happen, but we're going to ask so-and-so to deal with it, or we think it's better dealt with by a partner or another person. Also, some of these risks you want to terminate. So whatever's causing the risk, you stop doing it because it's that bad or that scary. And finally, you might be able to take advantage of a risk and use the risk to pursue a new direction. So I think the most important thing for you to take away from this is that thoughtfully consider how you're going to deal with risk in any project or initiative that you take advantage of, that you want to participate in. So let's quickly go to the next slide. We want to make sure we have time for questions. And this is really what we did, our culminating activity of this risk management. What will we do about this? So we created this chart that organized all this information, and we identified a point person from our teams for each of the risks and worries. And you have probably been utilizing this analysis whether you call it risk mitigation or something else during COVID, and you'll want to continue these considerations as we move into the post-COVID world. So it was very helpful for us in one place to identify the risk, show the impact, when might it happen, the risk window, the likelihood, and our plan. And it really helped us in addressing some things that we were all worried about. And it happens in any kind of a situation. And just briefly, although we're not going to talk a lot about this today, we are using a variety of evaluation tools, both with our coaches, our teams, our projects, and we would encourage you, of course, to do that as well. We're evaluating the initiative, and our teams and coaches are evaluating their work. We evaluate our trainings, and we address the feedback we receive on a very regular, immediate basis the next day of the training if we've heard something's not going well. And we heard that folks really like to have some fun, chocolate instead of all the learning stuff, broccoli. So we try to balance chocolate and broccoli. We also work with our teams and coaches to develop and implement evaluation plans for their projects with a particular consideration for reaching and impacting underserved audiences that has really been informed by our collaboration with OZI. Our goal is to model best practices in risk mitigation and evaluation for our teams and our coaches. We've done that kind of by ourselves on our initiative, this program, and also shared all our learnings with our teams and coaches. So now I'm going to turn it over to Cindy, who will talk about another one of our exciting success stories.
Thanks, Susan. Can I have the next slide, please, Amber? Great. So actually, before I go on to this slide and talk about Marinette County, I want to continue the story that I started at the top of the webinar about Kenosha. And this is seriously, as of today, breaking news. IMLS or the Institute for Museum and Library Services, which, you know, Susan kind of used to have a job there. They just today announced the finalists for the National Medal for the libraries. And I'm just pleased as punch to let you know that the Kenosha Public Library made that list. And I knew they were being nominated. I helped get some papers together for that. But they're just so thrilled to see that their work is recognized. And we'll see who ultimately gets awarded that medal this year. But really, really cool news for us here in Wisconsin. So now let's talk about Marinette County. So you heard when Amber was talking, she kind of talked about the ask, listen, and act part of community engagement, right? So when our teams were learning the skills they needed to interact with their communities, they learned the right way to facilitate asking people to participate. So in the case of Eau Claire, they're paying people to share their stories. Or I think it was Eau Claire, maybe it was a different one. And the thing that we also trained people in, and this is Erica's particular area of expertise, is to then listen closely. And listening is a skill. I know you all know that some of us are better at it than others, but you need to practice listening in order to be good at it. And then what happened is the library acted in some way. So in Kenosha, we heard that the council person, walked in arm in arm with the library staff. They were visibly acting within their neighborhood. And the result of that is empowerment. And that is empowerment for the community that you're serving. I want to say it's also empowerment for the library. And that's not a bad thing. We gain respect. Like Amber said, the ripples in the water, we see more bigger ripples in the water, the more we sort of empower ourselves to work with, for, and by our communities. So here's a little story that happened in Marinette County that kind of illustrates it. I want to say at the beginning of this, you can see Marinette County is way up north. It's almost on the border, or it is on the border with the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So it's way up there. It feels like a different part of our state. I'm more in the southern area, and they struggled. It is a very rural county. When COVID hit, there were so few staff because the libraries are so small that they honestly struggled to continue with this program. But they stuck with it, with many thanks to their coach and to Erica and Amber for kind of coaching them through it. And at one point, they were having conversations with people. So they were out there asking questions. They'd been trained to ask the questions, they asked them, and they listened very closely. And what they heard is people needed access to broadband. And we know this, right? Across the country, we know this is a major issue for all of our states, all of our counties, all of our local municipalities. The thing that they did after they listened and they heard we need more access to broadband is they started asking questions around and saying, what can we do to act within the municipalities that these people live in to give them better access? And it just so happened they asked the right question at the right time. And this is the awesome thing about community engagement, is you have a little bit of extra knowledge. So you know, have deeper roots within the community and go to the right person sooner than later, maybe. Well, they found the right person sooner than later. And when they asked, what can we do to make a change to get better, say, Wi-Fi access in more places around town, the person said, well, do people know about the access points that we installed? And the library folks had no idea what they were talking about. It turned out that 3 access points had been installed in town on some, previous burst of money within the state. They had never been turned on. So the quick win that our team in Marinette County got was turning on some existing access points that nobody but this one guy knew existed. So they were able to show their community that they listened because the community saw direct action happen after that, and they got what they needed. They got more places to park their car or sit outside and access a Wi-Fi hotspot. So that's an example of a quick win, but it's a really big win. It happened quickly because they talked to the right person, but it was sincerely impactful. That empowers the community to have more access to the information it needs to navigate just living in these crazy times. It also empowers the library to continue working with the community to make those changes that they want to see. So I want to give a big shout out to the 3-person team up in Marinette County. That's Jen Thiele, Sam Smith, and Rebecca Livick, and they're just knocking it out of the park up there. The project that they have coming up, I'm excited to see what happens next. So before I pass it off to Erica to have some final thoughts, I do want to just talk about the importance of storytelling. So you heard me tell a couple of stories, and I want to let you know that this story out of Marinette I shared through my boss, the governor's office, and the governor happens to have a big emphasis on rural broadband right now. So not only did they have a quick win for their own community, they also had a quick win for our entire state that our governor is very proud of. Thanks. You're up, Erica.
Thank you, Cindy. So the framework we created for the Wisconsin Libraries Transforming Community Project develops the skills needed to build deep transformational relationships with our communities. But as we talked about, we were challenged by not being able to have in-person conversations, which are at the core of our approach to community engagement. And let me admit, it would have been really easy for us to fall back and suggest the teams send out surveys to the community. But we know from our experience that it's not an effective way to build relationships or to collect any sort of really meaningful data about what's really important to people. And this year I've been reflecting a lot about something Larry Payne, who is super smart at the Houston Public Library, said, and that's, it's necessary for us to build the relationships we need before we need them. And we've seen firsthand how libraries with strong community partners in place were able to respond quickly and efficiently to the many obstacles in their way. And I know partnerships and collaborations aren't new for public libraries, but having the world pause gave us time to reflect on what community means while challenging us to think about how to build and create resilient communities that could come out of the pandemic in a stronger position than when they entered. Saying that out loud makes me realize like what a crazy audacious goal we set for ourselves, right? Like who do we think we are? But what we've seen over the past year has been incredible. Despite the pandemic, 12 public libraries have persisted in doing deep community engagement work. Not one team has dropped out, despite the many obstacles, which, as I said before, just makes me incredibly grateful and proud of them. We've been able to watch in real time the benefits of libraries working with their community partners and how those relationships are helping them navigate this year of extended trauma, either through identifying and responding to urgent needs in their communities, like the digital divide in Goodman, or responding to racial injustice in Kenosha. And despite the numerous external obstacles which we've outlined today, these partnerships are playing an essential role in helping communities endure and hopefully thrive going forward. Forging community requires that we have shared stories and experiences that reflect our common values. While we've been living through a divisive time, we've also remembered that humans are essentially creative, resilient creatures, right? Like last year, as Amber said, many people found themselves on Zoom for the first time, and it was created as a virtual meeting platform, but we saw people hack it and it became a venue for celebrations, happy hours, exercise classes, virtual library programs, and all sorts of other things. And in our case, important community conversations. And I believe that if we continue to tap into the creativity of our communities and make time to dream with them about what's possible while identifying what matters most to them, we can create a bold new world. We don't have to return to the world that we left behind a year ago, right? We've learned a lot, both about ourselves, our neighbors, our society, and the many tools that we have at our fingertips. We have this beautiful opportunity to connect with people, to curate and amplify their expertise and experience as we engage our communities in planning, decision-making, and implementing policies and programs that help both our libraries and communities move forward. Whether in person or digitally, we need to remember the importance of human connection and our ability to imagine a better world. So I'd like to conclude with the, David Lankus always reminds us that bad libraries build collections, good libraries build services, and great libraries build communities. But I would add to that, fabulous libraries work with their communities to transform society. And so as we start to boldly stride into whatever new reality awaits us, I encourage all of you to go forward and to be fabulous. And thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Do we have any questions? If so, please enter them in the chat box.
If I can, while we take a moment to see if questions come in, I wanted to build on what Susan was saying about risk management. And, so coaches are doing this tool with the team. And we went through that process on our level because we were paralyzed. I say we, I'm really talking about me, about the indecision of all the possibilities of the things that could go wrong. And recognizing how that was able to make us move forward, that same tool is being used with teams, and I would highly recommend it to anyone who's just feeling paralyzed by all the things that could go wrong. It's here we were able to think about what we could do regardless if it went wrong, and we didn't want our teams to be frozen. They'd put in all this work. We wanted them to feel confident in making their choices even if things went wrong.
So I'm not seeing any questions, but I do see a lot of thank yous. And I do want to say thank you as well, because you all really handled some really, really tough, really tough 2020 and 2021 topics. And it was just amazing. So I want to personally say thank you. And I want to thank everyone for being here today, and thank you for attending this webinar. Thank you for attending this conference. And if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact your state library CE coordinator. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you would complete it with your feedback. And thanks everyone for making the 2021 Southeast Collaborative Conference successful this year. And we'll see you all next year.